Welcome, everyone. This is Les Muller from Data Leaders. This is the Data Leaders podcast, and I am your host. And today on the show, I have Rooijen. Ryan is the head of data at Dyson with a very interesting background. And Ryan will be speaking at our Data Leaders Transformation Roundtable in March on the 6th here in London. Ryan, welcome on the show.
Thank you.
We are glad to have you. And so you will be speaking about a very interesting topic, which is embedding analytics across the business. It will be an interactive session, about an hour long, which will include a presentation from you, and then the audience will have the opportunity to ask you questions. There will be a group discussion as well that you will be facilitating. And in this episode, we will just unpack your session a bit, so the audience members will be prepared. For those audience members who haven't heard of you, can you just give us like a short introduction about where you're coming from and where you're headed?
Happy to. Not sure I've figured out where I'm headed just yet, but I can tell you a little bit about my background for sure. So I ended up applying to the Oxford Institute postgrad program, and I ended up writing my thesis on how real-time language analysis of data, I should say, from the London riots, can help you kind of understand the kind of real-world behavior. Basically, when people say certain stuff online, what does it tell you about what they do offline, right? And where do you see connections, and where do you not see connections? That's then, I guess, really made clear to myself, like, okay, this is an area that I want to play in. Maybe not hugely surprising. The company I ended up working for then next was Google. Because obviously, not only do they have a fantastic corporate culture, and there are huge opportunities to learn about analytics, but they also have a lot of interesting data in terms of search and such. So at Google, my role started in UK business, in UK sales, and then moved into roles around ad product strategy, first at the UK level, then the global level, and finally insights and analytics for their largest global advertisers. And pretty much kind of like the trend throughout those roles was very much trying to address the question of, okay, great that we as Google have all this data, but how do we actually use it to derive insights? Right, because that's of course always the question. People talk about how great it is to have data, but unless you can actually unlock that insight and make sure it drives an actionable difference inside a company or organization, what's the point, really? So I was there for over 4.5 years, and then last year I joined Dyson to lead their newly created global data and analytics team, where we are tasked with ensuring that Dyson leverages the data available to organization in order to create value for our customers and our business.
Fantastic. And yeah, you do have a very impressive track record also, working with a company like Google. But I know that Dyson is also making, quite a significant investment in actually expanding, their capabilities when it comes to leveraging data. How is that role, different for you? So are there any unique aspects to it that you kind of identified over, almost 1 year you've been with the company, right?
Yes. I mean, I'd say the biggest difference, is probably the, is just the reality of working in a company that isn't a tech company, right? Because I think the big difference when you are at Google or you're at Twitter or Facebook or at a firm like that is that these companies are data driven from the ground up. They have all the right capabilities in place. They've got the right platforms in place, and they also have massive data sets. When you work in a company that isn't a tech company, a lot of these capabilities need to be developed and need to be nurtured. And obviously, it helps that Dyson is a very forward-thinking engineering company. It's a very iconic brand and attract, luckily, a lot of very smart people, which makes it easier sometimes to have conversations internally about data. But at the same time, it's not as if 10 years ago data was a massive priority for them. So like many companies, they're now going through this transformation, which is very interesting.
Yes, and it sounds like then your session, which is titled "Embedding Analytics Across the Business," is very suitable to where you are at the moment. And so, ultimately, why did you choose this particular subject area?
So the reason I chose embedding data across the business was because I think the biggest challenge in many ways that companies face isn't about deciding what technology platform to leverage, right, or what AI algorithm to develop, but it's actually getting the business at large to engage with data and analytics. Because again, for most people, this isn't really a core part of their job yet, right? And in many ways, this lack of engagement, right, this lack of maybe in some ways kind of like digital or analytical literacy, is very detrimental because, of course, at the end of the day, if you think about it, all data is and all analytics provides is a way of making better decisions. So in an ideal world, every single person in any business, would use data to make decisions, right? Because it would basically mean they make mistakes less often, and hopefully that to some extent they can also automate part of their work, freeing up more of their time to do whatever else they want to do, right? That is, however, not the case in a lot of businesses, and I would, even say that to some people, data and analytics isn't quite the sexiest topic. I strongly disagree, of course, but I'm probably in the minority. So figuring out how to get the business to engage with it, how to embed this analytical thinking, how to embed these feelings of kind of responsibility and ownership and excitement about what's possible with data analytics, I think, is pretty much the foundation to building a proper data-driven and insights-driven organization.
Fantastic. And I saw that you did speak on similar topics in the past as well. That this session, this roundtable, will be a bit different. So our format is quite unconventional. So it will be a closed meeting, only 35 senior professionals. Everyone is leading a data-related function. And they will be coming from organizations like Johnson & Johnson, Sony, Coca-Cola, P&G. So, a very high caliber a group. And we will spend a bit more time on each session. So instead of having, 10, 15-minute presentations, we want to give the audience members a bit of time to digest and discuss amongst each other. And we are also very selective about who we invite. And we also check always how the topics are relevant to their current roles. And I know that your particular session got a lot of traction. So, all of the attendees are super excited to find out a bit more about, your experiences. And, I imagine that you have a lot to say about that. I mean, what were your, so you've been with Dyson for almost a year now. What kind of successes or experiences you've had so far when it comes to actually embedding, this in top management's agenda, and also just kind of distilling that data-driven mindset within the business?
So, I think it's always difficult with these large-scale initiatives to talk of successes, because I think sometimes it can take years for the fruits of either success or failure to become apparent. But I think we've certainly made some progress on those fronts you mentioned, Les. So I think firstly, one thing that we've emphasized, pretty much from when I started last year, is alignment with the business. So as much as data and IT traditionally can almost be orthogonal to the development and priorities of the business. For us, every project we undertake needs to be driven by an explicit demand from the business, right? There needs to be a clear executive sponsor attached. There needs to be a clear understanding of what monetary value this is going to generate, either for us internally as a business or in terms of experiences for our customers, or we simply won't do it. Now, as you can imagine, this occasionally causes a little bit of frustration, because if you, for example, want to, overhaul part of your infrastructure, it might feel very, we're looking for almost contrived maybe to say, oh, we're into upgrading this piece of infrastructure because it will lead to this business benefit all the way down the line. But what we found is that doing this really changes the way that people think about engaging with it. And also means that the business from the very beginning, is much more engaged, because they understand why certain changes are happening. It's not just, oh, those guys over there are doing something. we don't know what and why. It's, oh, actually, we have a pretty good idea because they're speaking our language, if you will. So I think that's probably the first thing. The second thing is that from a delivery perspective, understanding, what your team's kind of right to play is, right? And also understanding, from a value point of view, which tasks are best driven by your team. Now, of course, it depends on where your team sits. Our team is a global team. We sit centrally in the group. So I'm very keen to make sure that any roles that we can divest, any roles that we can push into the business, that we do so. And it doesn't mean that I'm, kind of shirking responsibility, because at the same time, if there's tasks, you can imagine on things like governance, that I believe are better centrally executed, I will also challenge our team to kind of step up and really take on that responsibility. Because what that means is, again, it fosters collaboration, because you're ensuring that everybody, works on what they do best, but it also provides clarity for the executive, right? Because if, you're a finance director and you're looking at certain headcount allocation, if it's very clear why certain roles sit somewhere, you're going to have a much easier time than if you just see analysts pop up everywhere and you're like, why the hell do we have so many analysts, and what are these people doing? And I think the third thing that we've really started to focus on is also the community and education piece. And again, I think the problem with data and analytics being such a popular topic is that people think they understand it, right? They think they have some degree of familiarity, right? They've read, the term AI so many times in a newspaper that, one day they walk in, and especially some senior leaders, can fall prone to this, and say, oh, we should do more with insert buzzword here, right? With AI. And again, I think, Dyson's probably a little bit less susceptible to this because of our engineering nature, but also my previous life, I saw this a lot with clients. It's very frustrating for teams. So something that we try to do is to say, okay, great that, you're excited about X, but realize that if you want your team or your organization or us to engage with X, there's a certain investment that needs to happen, right? Whether it's in time, whether it's in resources, whether it's just knowledge. And an analogy that I use, probably overuse, and I might even use it in the roundtable session, is one of baking a cake, where, if you were trying to bake a cake, like you'd never have an argument about, do we or do we not need eggs? Do we or do we not make flour, right? If the recipe says we need eggs and flour, you realize that the recipe needs eggs and flour. So occasionally when people say, oh, we need to do, this and that with data, and I go, okay, cool. The recipe is you need people who can do ABC. It's funny when people then try to argue with that. It's like, look, you can't argue with the facts. You can't argue with the recipe. Sure, if you want to not buy those ingredients, right, or you don't want to invest in those ingredients, that's fine. Then we can do something else, right? We can cook another dish. That's also fine. But, you can't demand, that I, make this giant birthday cake for all these people if you don't want to invest in some basic ingredients.
Yeah, I really like the gastronomical analogy, so to say. We might actually come up with an infographic, which would be the data integration cake. I'll flag it up with the content team, but it's very interesting. So actually, during your session, you will have, I think, around a 15-20 minute block in the beginning. You will actually educate the audience, share your insights. What will the session actually cover if you had to summarize it in a couple bullet points?
So I think what I'm trying to cover in the session is, some key principles and almost, if you will, let's stick with the analogy, ingredients, that I've found to be essential when, embedding analytics in a organization. And what I want to be cognizant of is that, any organization, is different to another, right? So it doesn't make sense to say, okay, the plan is, build a team here, build teams there, hire these kind of people in these ratios, because it doesn't quite work that way. Instead, it's almost a case of, hey, look, here are various levers you can pull at various times if you're leading a transformation like this, if you're trying to move the business in a certain direction. How do you figure out if the time is right? And also, how do you assess, if, something is moving in the right direction or not? Because that will hopefully lead to the participants leaving feeling that there's things they can apply the following day, as opposed to just thinking, well, that was really interesting, but that is completely not applicable to my business because of reason X.
Absolutely, yeah, I think, and this is actually sometimes we tell the attendees as well that, you know, with these roundtables, our aim is actually to leave them with more than just the list of ingredients. We want them to have the recipe and the cooking instructions as well, on actually putting those insights into action. And I think you partly answered the question already. But how do you think that the attendees will be able to put those, you know, insights into practice when they go back to their organizations?
So I think if they leave, participants leave, and, you know, almost perform a, I'll call it like, you know, kind of almost like a short little audit or checklist exercise, you know, the following day or the following week, where they just say, okay, hang on a second, have I got this, and have I thought about that, and have I got people who take ownership of something else? I think that would be really useful, and then hopefully, you know, we'll have had some good discussions that then can inform them on how to kind of take the next steps. Because what I found, in the past couple of years, when it comes to a lot of these analytical transformation projects that are now taking place, is that, you know, figuring out what the right, you know, kind of like framework is, figuring out what the right approach is, and almost having a type of radical honesty, you know, in your ability to assess where you are, you know, where your organization is, you know, is often, you know, key to coming up with a plan that is actually sensible, right? Because anybody can come up with, you know, a bunch of activities, right? A couple of tactical solutions, you know, anybody can come up with a list of dreams that they wish would come true. But it's always about striking that balance and saying, look, you know, we've got this big picture thinking. We've also tied it to some very specific kind of priorities or deliverables in our organization.
Great. And if you had to kind of capture only one idea that you would like the audience members to remember from your session, what would that be?
I was going to say, you know, make sure you have the right people in your boat before you even begin on your journey. Now I might actually say, you know, make sure you've got the right ingredients lined up before you even think about baking a cake. Because, like I said, you know, and especially with some of these larger, more ambitious projects, you know, if you as an organization, you know, are uncomfortable, you know, committing to certain resources, right? Or if you have a misguided idea about the kind of ingredients you have in the pantry, you're going to have a bad time. You know, and the projects, you know, that we're having, like I said, you know, some success with, to some degree, you know, are projects where, you know, we've very much forced ourselves to go through that process, you know, in a very rigorous fashion before we even started.
Yeah, I think that's very valuable advice, you know, for these data professionals who embark on these ambitious projects to set themselves up for success by having the, you know, the right conditions in place. Fantastic. Ryan, I would like to pick your brain about some future trends and technologies as well. So, you know, as someone who had been working in the field of data and insight and analytics, you must be, you know, super excited about a couple new trends that are on the horizon nowadays. What do you have your, you know, teeth sunk into nowadays when it comes to the implementation of these new tech?
So I think, you know, from our you know, guys, team's perspective, you know, the technologies we're very much focused on are, you know, around, you know, data warehousing, they're around data modeling, they're around, you know, data governance and quality. You know, these are trends that I'm very excited about, right? I think the ability to, you know, perform much more robust and powerful, you know, analyses and modeling activities in near real time is fantastic, right? More powerful abilities as well in order to kind of like share and collaborate, all while at the same time, you know, having a much higher degree of like governance and security in place, I think is fantastic. That said, I think from a maybe audience perspective, you know, technologies that I don't get to work on, but I think are, you know, are fascinating, are ones that will shape the way that we interact with data, right? So augmented reality, I think, is something that's absolutely fantastic. I mean, virtual reality, there's some cool stuff out there as well. I've you know, played around with you know, charts in Oculus before. You know, I think various companies have been demoing those kinds of things, but I think, augmented reality is where it really comes to life, right? Particularly if you can imagine having meetings and drilling down into data and really bringing it to life in a way that's much more, kind of like natural to humans than is, watching a PowerPoint presentation or just clicking through. Kind of in the same vein. I mean, obviously the ability of like AI to better help us understand patterns and be able to kind of extend our human ability in order to analyze data, I think is very very exciting, but early days.
Indeed, early days. And that was actually very interesting when you said about, the application of AR and, how that would actually bring, closer, data points, which is, fundamentally, not that ergonomic, and also human beings who actually deal with the data. And like, if you think about different timeframes, when do you think that it will have the chance of becoming, business as usual? Because I know that nowadays people are experimenting with it, but if you think about a professional application, when do you think it might become a reality?
I think knowing the pace of change of companies, I'd say probably somewhere in the next 7 to 10 years. I think these technologies, yes, the next couple of years, you'll see people demo it and then try them out. But I think there are challenges still need to be overcome, just around, to your earlier point, embedding analytics in the business, and ensuring you have the right degree of data quality, ensuring that you have the right kind of priorities that are aligned with the data analytics strategies. I think once all those are in place, I think then you can really start, playing with the new toys.
Yeah, so I think for those professionals then who are thinking long term, this might be the right time to actually, set the right conditions up, right, and put the right ingredients in place. So when the tech actually arrives and it's applicable, then they can just go ahead and implement it.
Indeed, I would say so.
I only have one final question to you, Ryan, this is a question I ask almost all of our guests. So if you had to give one advice to new and aspiring data leaders, people who would like to, become someone like you who's leading a data transformation in one of the biggest companies in the world, what would your advice be?
I think my advice to anybody thinking about, starting a career in the data analytics space is just get started, just jump in, because, I think people often worry, and I in the past definitely worried, when trying to figure out what kind of career I wanted, oh, am I qualified? Have I taken all the right kind of courses? I've got the right kind of work experience. But the reality is that, there is so much opportunity in this field, and there's so much variety in the types of challenges we encounter, that there really isn't one size fits all profile. And I would also say, with the rise of AI in particular, as we're trying to kind of model more of these algorithms on our own kind of human traits and behaviors, that the more diversity we have, right, whether that's in terms of background or thoughts or experiences, is only going to be better for all of us, right? I mean, research has already proven that more diverse companies perform better from a economic perspective. I mean, I think it'll only be a matter of time before we prove that AI that's been trained and developed by diverse teams performs better than the alternative.
That's brilliant advice. And Ryan, it's been great having you on the show. Thank you for unpacking your session a bit before it actually happens in March. Yeah, and we all look forward to meeting you in March. And until then, all the best. And I guess we'll speak soon.
Thank you. Take care, Les.
Thank you. Take care.